So my name's Matthew. I'm part of the facilitation team. I'm just going to kind of walk us through what we're going to do for the next half an hour or so in this room. We're going to start with a short presentation from Waterfront Toronto. They're going to take 10 or 12 minutes. Pina and Alex as well are going to walk us through some more details related to the new mobility solutions that are being proposed. Following that, we're going to use the tables that we're sitting at to have some small table discussions, probably similar to what you've done in the other rooms already. And then we're going to take the last 5 minutes or so just to get a report back from your table facilitator so that we all get a flavor for what the other tables were talking about as well. Following that, we'll work our way back to the main room for a larger report back so we can hear what was talked about in the various rooms today. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Waterfront Toronto, and just bear with us for 10 minutes or so. I ask that you hold any questions or comments just until we break into the table discussion so we get through the presentation itself. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I see you all saved the best for last. Welcome to the Mobility Room. My name is Pina Malazzi, and I'm the Vice President for Design at Waterfront Toronto, and I'm joined by Alex Mariou, who is our project manager for transportation and transit. And the two of us have been working together on the mobility work stream since this project sort of started. Waterfront Toronto, since its inception, has been Waterfront Toronto, since its inception, has been committed to the delivery of transit, and many of you will know that we've been undertaking planning in this area for a long time, including leading the environmental assessments for the Eastern Waterfront transit line, and we've been involved in transit reset for the waterfront for many, many years. We've successfully delivered both one of the first new LRT lines in Toronto on Cherry Street and a revitalized complete street on Queens Quay West, and I worked on that project, gave birth to 2 children while working on that project. So it was a long project, my 3rd child. When we kicked off this process, the first thing we did as a mobility team was to establish some objectives from Waterfront Toronto's perspective for the Keysight project. I'm just going to briefly walk through these, and then we'll get into the evaluation and the solutions. One of the primary objectives that we set is to reduce automobile emissions in order to achieve our climate positive targets. We can't reach anywhere near climate positive if we don't change the way we move around. We have a few strategies for this. One of them is reducing automobile dependency, and the second one is accommodating electric vehicle infrastructure so that people can transition to more sustainable modes. We've also got as an objective to reduce congestion, and obviously the picture here is one form of congestion. That's probably the first thing that comes to mind. But we also have increasing curbside congestion with more and more Uber, Lyft, and curbside uses. We also have seen an increase in congestion in our cycling network, which is great news, by the way. But what we've seen on the Martin Goodman Trail right outside here is numbers as high as 600 to 800 riders an hour, and I don't think that's what we intended to design that for. So we've got to really plan around how we manage that congestion. We also want to ensure that all mobility options remain affordable for those who live, work, and pass through Quayside. We want to ensure safety within the precinct by applying Vision Zero principles and reducing confusion. And lastly, we want to reduce barriers for all users to the waterfront. So this isn't our first meeting on this topic, so I just want to summarize some of the feedback we've received to date. This is really a sample. If you want all of the feedback, then there's a very big report on the keysightto.ca website, which summarizes the last round of consultation. In the support category, we have heard at all of these meetings, and Alex and I have been at all the mobility discussions so far, the importance of delivering transit on the waterfront, and this has not at all changed today. This has been the #1 topic that everyone who's come through this room has wanted to talk about. We've also heard how important, and definitely agreement from everybody on the importance of climate positive solutions for mobility, and the importance for continuing to improve our cycling infrastructure. Areas of consideration for us at Waterfront Toronto, there's been feedback around ensuring that Keysight feels connected to the bigger network, doesn't feel like it's in a bubble, that we ensure that vulnerable users are considered, especially when it comes to innovations and smartphone technology, but also around new designs for streets. So the curbless streets have come up, ensuring that we enable accessibility with new ideas like that. And then lastly, ensuring that these innovations don't make mobility costs more for people. So, as you heard in the plenary, there are a total of 160 solutions that we have identified in the Master Innovation Development Plan. 32 of those solutions were mobility focused. A full list of those 32 mobility solutions are actually in attachment 4 of the booklet that was handed out to everybody today. It's the red section, and I encourage you to look at that. It's the last 3 pages as we spend some time here together. After completing a thorough review of each of the solutions, which included ranking effectiveness of the solution based on the objectives we set, evaluating the risks and trade-offs for each solution, and feedback from consultation, Waterfront Toronto has supported 31 of the solutions. Each of these 31 was then categorized in 4 degrees of support. And I think we heard about those degrees of support in the plenary, but I'm going to go a little more granular from a mobility perspective. So from the support and advocate for regulatory reform, we categorized 6 of the solutions for mobility in that section. Support and advocate for government funding, we categorized 9 of the solutions in that section. Support with WT investment, we categorized 4 solutions. And the other 12 solutions we consider to be very effective, but that they're best left to the private sector to implement. As was noted in the plenary, these conclusions do not mean that Waterfront Toronto has approved moving ahead with the project or with a partnership with Sidewalk Labs. It does mean that Waterfront Toronto sees merit in including these solutions in our draft innovation plan for Keysight. And we're going to now drive into a few of these solutions in more detail, and I'm going to let Alex do that.
Thank you, Pina. So I've got an example of each of those levels of support, including the solution that we said we wouldn't support. So the first one we're talking about is wayfinding beacons. So this is an example of a solution that the evaluation committee identified that we would support with Waterfront Toronto investment. So what wayfinding beacons are is they provide another layer of information for wayfinding applications, especially tailored to those that are people that are blind or partially sighted. So there's an example of an applications out there for people that are blind or partially sighted. One of them is Blind Square. So Blind Square works on GPS, but also works on these wayfinding beacons that provide additional level of information in the public and private realm, indoor and outdoor, that help people that are using that app navigate public and private space. So another example of a solution that we said, our evaluation committee suggested that we would support with Waterfront Toronto investment, was expanding the active transportation network to the front door of all buildings. So not just major cycle routes on the main corridors, but also ensuring that there's bicycle facilities on side streets as well, so people can get right to their final destination safely and comfortably on a bicycle, and for pedestrians as well. So Waterfront Toronto is responsible for delivering the public infrastructure to Quayside and designing the streets. So it's not a stretch for us to ensure that we have this bicycle network rolled out in the precinct. So an example of a solution that we would support with advocate for policy or regulatory reform is the dynamic curb. So in your discussion guide, dynamic curb is actually broken out into 3 distinct solutions. So one of those is the actual physical movement of the lay-by from pickup and drop-off area, like you see in this image here. And in times when demand for pickup and drop-off is lower and there may be more demand for public space or cafe space or sidewalk, that lay-by could go away and it can convert into public space. So in order to enable that functionality, one thing is that communications for that space would be streamlined. So one part of that is to have digital signage. So the signage here would indicate what the use is for at that given time, as opposed for you to try to depict with a static sign what the use of that space would be. And then the third part of that is pricing the use of curb to help manage the demand for that, especially in the future if there's an increase in demand for pickup and drop-offs, that this is a mechanism to help manage that demand, encourage pickup and drop-offs to happen off-street or within the site itself as opposed to on-street. Now this last one that that I have an example of as a solution that we've supported, but just to include, so no Waterfront Toronto investment or advocacy or anything, but that we would like to see is this discounted mobility package. So the discounted mobility package is made up of two solutions in your discussion guide. One is the actual grouping of services into a single offering. So right now, if you want a Metro Pass and you want to use car share and you want to use Toronto Bike Share, you would get memberships for each of those services individually. So this discounted mobility package would group those types of services into one offering and one payment system at a discounted rate. And then the other part of that is actually integrating all those solutions into one service platform where you could plan your trips, pay for your trips, and get real-time information on those services that you're using through one single platform, one window. So the world is advancing towards this, and the private and public sector are working together to deliver these types of solutions, and that's why we're supportive and think it's beneficial. It's just not within the realm of what Waterfront Toronto as an organization would be contributing towards. And then this last example solution is the one of the 32 that we didn't support, the only one. And although we wanted outdoor comfort systems, this particular solution, the raincoats, would provide shelter beside the buildings, but requires this structure, as you see here, fastened into the public right-of-way, and could potentially hinder accessibility as opposed to improving it. So that's the reason why we didn't support that. Although we're still open to other solutions for improving outdoor comfort, just this one in particular we didn't support.
Thanks very much. So just a couple last things before we break into our discussions. These are the focus questions that we've got on your tables on the pink sheets. Are meant to help guide the discussions. That said, if there's something else that you want to talk about that's not directly related to these questions, by all means, that's what we're here for today as well, is to hear from you and hear the feedback that you want to share. Just quickly, the most broad is, do you agree with Waterfront Toronto's conclusion that Sidewalk Labs proposal sufficiently addresses the challenges they're trying to address, and why or why not? And then getting more specific into those solutions, proposed solutions, is, are there any that you'd like to see Waterfront Toronto prioritize? If so, which ones and why? And then on the flip side of that, are there any that you have concerns about? And again, if so, which ones and why that is, and then anything else. We're going to discuss those at our tables. There's a facilitator. I may have done this at the beginning, but it's slipping my mind now after the fourth rotation. So if you are the table facilitator, put your hand up, or helping with that table. Great. So what I'm going to get to do, I think it might just be a bit easier, is actually Darnell, I'm going to get you to go back there so that one person's moving instead of 5 or 6. So that person's there as a resource to help facilitate the conversation, and they're going to be documenting the feedback that's shared. They are not the subject matter experts. Waterfront Toronto will be kind of roaming around, probably sitting down at tables at various points, and they are the subject matter experts and will be able to respond to questions and comment on feedback that's shared as well. If you need someone, you don't have them from the table, the facilitator will get them over there for you. We'll take the next 20 minutes, 25 minutes or so to have those small table discussions. Use that time collectively as a group, and then the table facilitator will report back just on some highlights before we move back to the plenary room. So use your table to have that discussion. You can also write your comments down on those pink sheets and leave that with us. The last thing I'll say before I let you go is the key resource is that in that discussion guide, almost at the back, attachment number 4 is where it says new mobility, the red or burgundy maroon color, whatever you want to call it. There's the solutions and a bit of a write-up related to those as well as the proposed solutions. So use that as a resource as well. And with that, I'll let you go, and we'll be roaming around if you need anything else. Thanks a lot.
Had a really good conversation at our group, very inquisitive and a lot of transit enthusiasts. So I'll go through some of the things that came up. So there was a lot of surprise in questions regarding the actual ride sharing and uses of cars. Concern both that research shows that it's not necessarily good for CO2 measures to have ride share vehicles, whether it's a good thing to even include in the mobility package, and things like that. A thing to suggest was to finance maybe more of a ride share amongst residents and people who work in the neighborhood. So that could maybe be included in the mobility package as some sort of neighborhood benefit. So if there's someone who's driving into work, maybe they can pick up other people along the way. Sorry, I'm turning my notes. There was questions about the design of the streetcar and what kind of creature comforts would be included in that. And that suggestion would be that this is a big opportunity with how innovative that the project is to kind of really change the face of transit and make it modern and enjoyable and something that people want to go on. There was clarification about the mobility management as well and what info is collected and how it's being impacted. So whether it includes changing the signs and updating them frequently, whether it changes the mobility package pricing and things like that. And then another big piece, the kind of last big piece, was on safety and concern that it wasn't mentioned a whole lot throughout or clarified, in particular around curbless design and looking really into how we need to set a lot of these expectations and regulations first and then try and reach for some of the more aspirational things afterwards. And one more other thing, which was a lot of interest around the LRT extension in itself and kind of vagueness and not a whole lot of clarification within the package and us really needing to focus on that as something moving forward. Thank you.
Are you still ready? Yeah. I'm going to give her some more time. So we had a very, really detailed and very intriguing sort of discussion over at our table. We had a variety of stakeholders, ranging from people who live in and out of the city, especially people who want to move near to the proposed area. A big thing that we sort of talked about and hinted towards was how connecting the LRT with the other mass transportations. And it doesn't really make sense that if the development proceeds before there's adequate LRT, like you need to have that there. So that was a sentiment that was brought up. There was also a certain, a lot of the table was sort of happy from what we sort of understood was like they were really happy with a lot of the solutions, such as, for example, like the proposed UCC. Also, the dynamic curbs was one thing that was really interesting. One thing that we noticed was that with the underground tunnels, the table claimed that it should be fully robotic. I'm not sure if there were like a human interaction there, but it should be fully robotic and automatic. We also liked that the movable curb was in place. Adding to the idea that it's feasible and depends on the situation and density of different types of congestion, so it can sort of translate over. And there should be sort of a distinction between private and public partnerships, and the overall understanding of the different roles that are involved should be more in depth and should be a bit more clear. But yeah, that was from our team. Yeah.
All right, so first off, thanks, Jay, for giving me some time. We had a lot of conversations at our table. I have a really great big table here. We had a really great conversation here. So one of the first, great comments that we had at the table was one of the participants said, "I love my city." And that's kind of one of the things that I think we have to remember here. We love this city and we really want what's best for it. And that's something that, was addressed here. Also, the concept of coming here to get a bit more information, to learn a little bit more about the project. And then having this site, because it is a smaller site, having it as like a test bed or almost like a pilot for testing, for example, like the app, some of these solutions, some of the infrastructure, and testing to see if this can then be tied into the rest of the city and basically scaled up to use throughout the city, throughout the country, throughout the world. The other concept that came up is, the participants here wanted the government to support and kind of act as a somebody who manages this process, manages how data is used, but not to block innovation. And also there was some concerns around safety with biking and walking, and just making sure that this new community makes those really safe modes of transit. Yeah, and that's it. It's the majority. Is there anybody else, or is that? Yeah, I think that's it.
Great, thanks a lot. So again, some similar things we've been hearing throughout the day in terms of using this as kind of a test site and seeing how the innovations or the solutions, if successful, can be spread out. A lot about the LRT and transit, and really making sure that that's something that's well planned and is make sure that the area is connected through transit to the surrounding city. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start to move back to the plenary room. We've got all the table facilitators were taking lots of notes. I've been taking notes based on what they've said, but their notes, as well as anything you write on the pink sheets, will make it into the summary from today. That draft summary will get shared with everyone that's signed in and asked for that. Check that box as you sign in. So if you haven't done that already and would like to get a copy of the draft summary, make sure you do that on the way out. And that way, if we have missed anything or misrepresented anything, you can let us know and we can fix it. There's also, and the facilitators may have mentioned this already, but you can go online to participate as well now that you've kind of had a chance to have some discussions and reviewing the proposed solutions in more detail. You can go on up until the end of next month, March 31st, to provide feedback online as well, and all that feedback will get filtered to Waterfront Toronto as well. So if we start to move back to the plenary room, also if you have one of the clickers on you, just make sure you take that with you, and before you leave today, just leave it with one of the staff as you're leaving the main room as well. We will use those again for a couple more questions in the main room, so you don't have to give them up yet, but before you leave today. And we'll see you back in the main room in a few minutes. Thanks a lot.